story has duality.
The movie begins like all good vampire films with a ghost ship pulling into port. At the Brooklyn harbor, the inspector Silas and his nephew Julius are distracted by family feud when the ship comes plowing through the lighthouse, almost killing them. After a brief unscripted attack by a pigeon, the ship's unscrupulous appearance sends Julius packing while leaving his uncle to search for damages for his TV. He discovers the captain with his throat torn out and all the crew members piled up together on deck, when a large wolf leaps over him before growling and taking off into the city. Silas manages to get a glimpse of the wolf's shadow as it turns into a human and casually walks away. That night, Julius is thrown out on his ass by his girl for falling asleep while making love, when a pair of gangsters he owes money to spot him and chase him into an alley. They almost run him down in their vehicle, as Anthony's no longer looking to collect money for his boss and has brought hitman Tony with him to whack Jules. Just as he's about to shoot him, a dashing stranger appears from a fog and interjects. Maximillian calls himself a connoisseur of death and begins giving tips on the correct way to kill. Tony, having heard enough, shoots the stranger dead, but he rises back up, thanks the man for his first experience with a gun, then rips his heart clean out, revealing himself to be a vampire. Anthony tries run away and get his gun loaded, but Max leaps on him and tears him limb from limb. Seeing his window to escape, Julius runs as quick as he can until he feels safe, then tries to catch his breath. But Max comes crashing through the window, producing fire from his hands. The vampire says he followed Julius from the docks and needs a degenerate like him for his servant. He infects Julius with his blood, turning him into a ghoul that can act as his eyes and ears while the sun's up. Julius begins instantly following his master, as Max tells him he's come to America in search of the last descendant of his Caribbean vampire tribe, in the hopes of making her his wife. Though he says she's only half vampire and doesn't know it herself, as Detective Rita shown to be the lead investigator of the ghost ship and its 17 dead passengers. Captain Dewey worries about her mental state after the recent loss of her mentally ill mother, as Rita goes on board the ship alone to look around, while her partner Justice questions Silas, who acts hysterical about everything, but that's just him. He says a giant wolf attacked him 25 times the size of Wolfman and had its junk flopping around in his face. Maximillian and his new Renfield come back to the crime scene as Max's coffin's still on board the ship. When a police dog notices the killer's scent on him, Max uses his powers to explode the dog, sending it flying into the water. On board the ship, Rita's looking around when she falls through rotten floorboards into a hidden room containing Max's coffin. She opens it and sees a vision of herself as it opens its eyes and startles her. Just then Max comes around the corner about to kill the intruder, but notices that she's the half vampire he seeks and takes off in a ball of light. She tries chase him down, but he gets away, having somehow taken the coffin and all the ancient artifacts with him. The only trace left of either of them is Julius's ear, as he is now shown to be decaying away in his servitude of evil. They take the coffin back to his apartment where his uncle Silas is the landlord. He says the cops didn't believe him about the wolf and notices his nephew is falling apart, but doesn't really care, just tells him that rent is now doubled when seeing that Max is his new employer. The ancient vampire pays him in gold coins, which Silas gladly accepts and welcomes him to the building.
Bye.
With only having until the next full moon to make Rita his, Max demands they find her tonight, then throws Julius into his mirror, saying that he hates them.
Got it.
Across town, Rita walks home when she begins to get chased inside her building by an unseen wolf. She attempts to get in the elevator as it smashes its way through, but is greeted by the same bleeding figure of herself. It lunges at her, but she wakes up in bed having just been a dream. She wonders if she is beginning to go crazy like her mother was, as she is shown to have been a Caribbean supernatural expert. She tells Justice that she never met her father as he died back on his island before she was even born. At the police station, the detectives are told that the ship's log was written in an ancient language, so they sent it to be translated, as her and Justice are put on the case of who tore gangsters Anthony and Tony into pieces just 3 blocks from the docks. Julius is tasked with spying on Rita and is now eating any form of life he can. While polishing Max's limo, his hand falls off and is seen by Silas, but his uncle just says to thank God the car's an automatic, and to watch his manhood doesn't fall off next. Once Max is awake, he tells his ghoul that Rita must give herself to him willingly, and that he will convince her with a dance, then smashes the radio with his eyes and mirror with his breath, as Julius begins choking up on the residual magic. Rita and Justice go to a dance club where Dr. Zeko has translated the ship's ancient log. He tells them that it reads like a horror story of vampires and sickness, saying that he faced one himself back on his island, that took his woman and left the scar across his face. After he leaves, Max appears at the bar next to Rita and begins to make his move. It doesn't work at first, but he saves her from a cobra attack which he instigated, and she agrees to a dance. But the combination of Justice reminding her she is on duty and Julius's horrible attempt to wing man his master, Rita leaves Max not agreeing on a date. He then threatens to rip the ghoul's tongue out if he doesn't quiet himself in the future. He follows Rita back to her apartment where Justice is meeting her roommate Nikki. Since Justice is attracted to Rita, he avoids Nikki's advances towards him as she continues to pursue him all the way down to the street. When he leaves, Max appears and seduces Nikki into inviting the stranger into her home. He makes Rita believe it's Justice in bed with her to make her jealous, then proceeds to kill Nikki and make it look as though she moved out in the morning. The next night, as Rita attends a night service at her church, Max finds her pastor sneaking a drink around back before killing him and taking his form. When stepping inside the church, he begins to burn up, so he pulls everyone attending outside under the guise of needing some fresh air. During his sermon, he speaks of evil as being necessary for good to exist, and starts calling out people in the audience for things they've done. Justice shows up and Rita begins to argue about Nikki as the whole crowd and Max add fuel to the fire, but when she leaves the area, she calms enough to continue working the case with him. They visit a local crime boss after discovering the torn-up Tony and Anthony worked for him, but they are laughed at when asking if their last target could be the one who killed them. As Max continues to stalk them, he tells Julius that the only reason he hasn't taken the form of Justice himself is because he requires a window of evil, but Justice is a pillar of good. When Julius is shown to have stolen a mannequin's arm to replace his own, Max is impressed with his improvising and calls him his best ghoul yet. A local criminal tries to rob them out front of the restaurant. Rita's inside, so Max kills him and takes his form. He bursts in on the meeting and holds the entire restaurant, including the cops, at gunpoint. Trying a different approach, Max straight up tries to drag Rita away but notices he's standing in an Italian restaurant and the garlic bread puts him on edge. When a cat leaps at him, he shoots it, giving Rita a window to disarm him with a bottle, throw him to the floor, and arrest him. Before the police can charge who they believe to be just some low-level criminal named Guido, Max hypnotizes a zealot into attacking an officer, then turns back into Max to evade him. After the hostage situation, Rita's suspended for 2 days to recover, but is almost run down by a taxi before being saved by Max. The evil plan pays off when Max invites her to have dinner and she decides to accept, since she thinks Justice isn't interested. Once she's all dressed up, she bumps into Justice, who came around to ask her out himself, but the ghoul pulls up in his limo to pick her up for her date. She goes to Max's extravagant apartment where he seduces her with art from her favorite painter, and the two spend the night dancing, where he eventually persuades her to say yes and bites her. The next day at work, Justice finds Nikki's dead body strung up like a painting Rita made from one of her dreams, so he races over to her apartment but finds her still in bed with the room darkened. Rita wakes up and begins to get passionate with Justice, which for Rita turns to hunger and she starts getting aggressive with him. Her fangs grow out and she almost bites him in the neck, but catches her reflection fading away and runs away terrified. She confronts Max at his apartment and realizes that he's also responsible for the murders she's investigating. Max tells her that her father was a vampire and he sacrificed himself to save her mother, which is what drove her insane. He convinces her that she will be happier as a vampire instead of with the humans who killed her father. Justice plans to rescue Rita from Max and goes to seek advice from Dr. Zeko. The vampire hunter produces an ancient dagger that can kill Max, and explains that it was Rita's mother with him in the Caribbean until she was seduced by Rita's father. To avoid becoming a bloodsucker forever, Rita must refrain from drinking it until the next full moon, as she's shown with Max searching for her first victim. During the hunt, Rita freaks out when she sees Max feeding and refuses to partake. She flees to a church but gets knocked back from entering by a bright light and is taken to Max's in a weakened state. He tells his ghoul to collect his things as he plans to leave town. When Silas comes walking in looking for $50 Julius still owes him. Max then tries to offer him as a meal for Rita, when Justice and Zeko come barging in. The familiar tries to protect his master by attacking the two, but he falls over and his eyeball pops out. Justice punches Max but he barely reacts and knocks him across the room, as Zeko stabs the vampire with a knife but misses the heart. Before he's killed, Rita saves Zeko's life and the two vampires leave in a flash. While helping the confused ghoul look for his eyeball, Justice accidentally stands on it, as Silas convinces the servant that his master is no good for him when his whole arm pops off. Justice is given the blade by a wounded Zeko and he goes to Max's lair alone, but finds Rita lying in the coffin. Max tries to convince Rita to make Justice her first kill, while the detective lunges at the vampire but misses all his swings. They begin to fight, when Justice realizes his strikes have an effect on Max, but the more powerful vampire still handily defeats him. As Rita bends down and is just about to feed on her partner, she spins around with the dagger and plunges it into Max's heart. Max begins to deform as Rita tells him that the vampiric part of her must die. He says that he knew she was a killer as he collapses into his coffin, then turns back into his human form and disintegrates into smoke. The place begins to rumble and the coffin disappears in an explosion of light, leaving Rita and Justice to finally embrace with a passionate kiss. Meanwhile, down on the ground, Julius has now completely decayed but realizes that he at least still has the car. He finds Max's ring having flown out the window during the explosion and puts it on, instantly transforming into a fully limbed, well-dressed bloodsucker. He tells what will soon be his first ghoul that there's a new vamp in town, as Silas says that he had that exact same look back in 1962. And the movie ends.
Bang, 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 bang. When she walked out here this morning, she was bow-legged.
So you made it. I appreciate your time. I couldn't have done it without you. Tell your mother I said thanks.